I can't tell you what a huge pleasure and a privilege it is to be here today as your minister. It's a funny job being a minister. When I arrived in Parliament, people said, be very careful if you've had a career in medical research and the life sciences, they won't give you anything to do with that. And it's an incredible privilege to have been given an opportunity to come and support and work with and promote this great organisation. And I genuinely thank you for what you're all doing. You make my job as your minister very, very easy. And it is a real privilege to be here. Last week I was addressing an audience of a similar size and similarly well lit in Washington. Some of you who follow my work at Freeman_George might have seen that I gave a somewhat messianic speech to the American Progressive Health Conference about the importance of patient-centered medicine, of data, of genomics, of this quiet revolution of empowerment, of research medicine, of an intelligent healthcare system using its own daily diagnostic and treatment footprint to inform a more intelligent healthcare system. And I made the point at numerous points in the speech, Mr. Trump, that this is actually about values. It's about harnessing the values of a health service founded on principles and values back in 1947, timeless values that I think still keep us all motivated. It is very simple. It's one for all and all for one. You don't find a cure for a disease on your own. You can't shine a light on the causes of disease without pooling your data and your records and your health insights. Health and health research are fundamentally a collective endeavour. And I honestly, while Alex, you talk about predecessors, I honestly believe that if Nye Bevan were here today, he would be even more messianic than me about the importance of data and genomics and the collective pooling of research assets and intelligent medicine to prevent disease for the next generation. And it is my great privilege to take my position in that long line of distinguished ministers, and those of you who follow my work know that I do this in a very non-partisan spirit. This sector needs long-term security and confidence, and this organisation needs it too, and I believe that has been noticed. It's also a particular thrill to be here in this your year, the NIHR at 10, and to have kicked it off with Sally with an NIHR Parliament Day, a great initiative, opening up the NIHR so that everybody in Parliament can understand what a fantastic asset this is. I want MPs around the country to know where their nearest NIHR facility is. I want charities to begin to see that we are very transparent and open in Parliament about what an extraordinary asset it is. But it's also a pleasure to be here on State Opening Day, and I have to say, only the indefatigable Sally could arrange for the Queen to come to Parliament Square to celebrate the NIHR at 10. That gives me an opportunity publicly as well as privately as I have just to pay tribute to Sally and Russell. There are others too, of course, in the team, but we are in the middle of a transition from Sally to Chris Whitty, and I want to put on record as the Minister as you depart, not thankfully Richmond House, where we continue to have your services as a magnificent Chief Medical Officer, but to thank you for what you've done. You have a formidable reputation on the Whitehall Strip. It's very well earned, and I believe it is in no small part due to your tenacity. And I say this having been on the other side in the research sector and seeing the NIHR change the landscape, that this organisation is in safe hands. And I'd be so bold as to say that whilst this Chancellor and I have anything to do with it, this organisation has very, very strong support at the heart of government, not least from the Prime Minister, who I'll say something else about in a moment. In January, I described this organisation as the jewel in the crown of the UK biomedical and life science research ecosystem. And I do believe it's true that today it shines brighter than ever. And that is an extraordinary testament to the leadership team and to all of you who do so much. I'm lucky on visits, I get to see what's going on. I meet the research nurses, I meet the informaticians, I meet the people in those research centres on often rainy and windy Fridays when the TV cameras aren't shining, and the sense of mission that runs throughout the organisation is formidable. And it reminds me all the time of that famous story of Jack Kennedy visiting the Kennedy Space Centre and asking, as he was wont to do, the most junior person he could find, she was a cleaner, what she did here. And she said, "Why, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And that sense of collective endeavour and the nobility of what this organisation is doing does go right the way down through the organisation. I think that is part of its great strength. The truth is, if the NIHR didn't exist, the finest minds in Whitehall would be sat, hopefully around my desk, working out how we could invent an organisation that would sit within the NHS, devoted to research, supporting the mainstream practice of daily healthcare with intelligent information that comes from an intelligent footprint from that diagnostic and treatment activity. We'd be saying, well, we want it to be national, not just in Oxford, Cambridge and London. We'd want it embedded in every hospital. We'd want plastic doors that swing so you can go from the ward to the lab. We'd want industry working in there with our best academic and clinical scientists. We'd want a network of world-class informatics to gather the information, and we'd want a really cast-iron mechanism for making sure we back the best research on the basis of excellence, not just keep giving money to the same old people. Well, if you were to start now and design it, you'd find it already exists, and it's an incredible tribute to the team that it has survived, and it survived for very good reason. Not least because it sits right at the heart of the vision that the Prime Minister and I set out back in that 2011 10-year life science strategy. And the key phrase for me in it was this: every patient a research patient, every hospital a research hospital. The idea that simply by being in the NHS, by being treated, you are contributing to an intelligent healthcare system that's capable of helping to use your treatment to prevent disease for the next generation. And that is embodied in this organisation. And it goes right to the heart of the landscape that, as your minister, I am doing everything I can to put in place. It's a very different landscape from the one that I joined this sector in. When I joined the life sciences 20-odd years ago, it was very siloed, very long cycle. If you worked in early stage academic science, you might possibly be involved in a spin-out, which might possibly raise some money if it was lucky, which might possibly partner with industry if it was lucky, might possibly get through pre-clin and over the wall from R into D and go through phase 1, 2, 3, 4, marketing approval, health economics assessment, and eventually licensing, and eventually come back to the patient waiting. And honestly, I worked in the sector for 5 years, didn't meet a patient. We were developing technologies, you just pass it on to the next person. Eventually somebody would get round to the patient and the clinician. And the truth is that a profound, quiet revolution is going on. Everybody is coming back again to where we were 50, 100 years ago, to start with the patient. To start by asking the question, what is the disease progression? What is it that these patients have that these don't? Why do they respond to this drug and not these? Why do these patients get this disease in a different way? And the NIHR sits right at the heart of that very different patient-centered model of translational research. And that is why I think it is such a recognized and respected organization. It also sits right at the heart of the vision that the Prime Minister put me in post to see through. A vision in which we reduce time and cost and risk for developing new drugs and devices and diagnostics, and harness the power of the NHS as the world's only comprehensive universal healthcare system, and the intelligence that organisation has to support intelligent, efficient, modern, 21st century personalised care. And at the heart of that strategy, we said we can't just support the life sciences sector from Department of Business as an important £60 billion industry sector. We have to unleash the power of the NHS as a second cylinder, pumping in the data, the tissues, the genomics, the access to that clinical infrastructure, and pulling through innovation more quickly. We cannot afford to pay the high prices for the latest technology on a retail model, the NHS as a retail purchaser. We have to become a partner in that innovation, sharing those assets to get quicker access to innovation for our patients, in return for quicker access to the developers of innovation, to the data and the infrastructure to help them refine it. That is the New Deal at the heart of the Accelerated Access Review, and that is the New Deal that the NIHR is fundamental to. People talk about medical research over here and clinical research over here. There's something in between, which I call research medicine. It's the use of daily medicine to drive and inform intelligent medicine for tomorrow, and that is where the NIHR sits, and it's an incredible platform. I wanted to share with you something that triggered me and drove me on to become an early evangelist for translational medicine and for that model of clinical, academic and industry partnership. It was the 2001 Cambridge Biotech Conference. I was there as a young investor with more hair and a slimmer suit and somebody else's money to invest. And there was a talk from, I remember her well, it was the head of JP Morgan's biotech finance group in Wall Street. And as she walked on, I thought something's changed. She wasn't in the obligatory power suit of the Wall Street a venture capitalist, she was in jeans and trainers and a T-shirt. And she walked to the front of the stage and she said in a very quiet voice who she was. And she said, "I've come to tell you, I've spent 15 years financing healthcare technologies. I've just been diagnosed. I think it was one of the rare leukemias. And she said, I will be dead in 3 years. There is no cure for me. Please," she said, "will you just do one thing? As you invest and start companies, never, ever forget the patient who's waiting for the treatment." I've never have forgotten her speech. And I think the NHR sits right at the heart of that. We need industry to help us develop innovations. But we are first and foremost here for patients, for putting patients into research and for making the research ecosystem work for patients. And that's why I think it's so fantastic that we've heard today from patients. And Hillary's talk earlier was completely inspiring. And I get to see, as I go around the NHR facilities, that voice, the eyes of patients who've begun to have a diagnosis, who've begun to feel the system is listening and there for them. Even if there's no treatment, that moment where patients, and we're seeing it in the genomics program in rare disease, when the clinical fraternity begins to recognize their condition and take it seriously and research it, it's an incredible moment of empowerment for patients. And we heard that this morning. And that's why I think that in this new landscape, the charities have such an important role to play. And it's why I've made a big, bold offer to the AMRC and to the research charities. In this landscape, they come to top table alongside Big Pharma. In a world in which patient data, tissues, genome, consent is so important, it will be the patients and the charities, I think, who begin to play an ever more important role in driving research. It's not just CRUK with their now joint laboratory with AstraZeneca. We're seeing it with the smaller charities, with Fight for Sight, with the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, with a whole range, beginning to drive the research agenda and the protocols and working with industry. And the NIHR infrastructure makes that very possible in a very powerful way. 3 weeks ago, we saw some incredibly exciting results from a 3.5-year follow-up study in an unpronounceable eye disease called choroideremia. It was made possible through the NIHR and charities working in collaboration. We see similar extraordinary breakthroughs in cancer. I was recently at the Institute of Translational Medicine in Birmingham, where Charlie Craddock and his team, using NIHR facilities, have pulled in tens of millions of pounds of free cancer drugs for NHS patients and driven and developed the protocols for accelerated access with Cure Leukemia. The NIHR facilities are becoming a magnet for charity and patient-led research models around the country. And I genuinely believe that translational model of patient-centered research is changing the landscape radically. And the biomedical research centers and the NIHR facilities around the country have been completely central to it. Don't just take it in words. In the last 6-year period, those centers have driven innovations resulting in over 340 patents, generated over £80 million from IP, and seen over 40 spin-off companies established. That's why I make the case that the £1 billion a year is the best investment we make in a resilient and successful and productive and healthy and wealthy economy. Take of Athena Vision, the company recently spun out of UCL, where I used to work. It's developing a pipeline of ocular gene therapies in partnership with another company, Myra GTX. And they're starting with 4 clinical programs in inherited retinal conditions. They're working at the NIHR Moorfields Biomedical Research Centre, which I recently visited, and with the NIHR Clinical Research Facility for Experimental Medicine, which is supporting the translation of that gene therapy program from lab to early phase clinical testing. And in December, UCL announced the launch of another spin-off company, Freeman Therapeutics, and they're developing gene therapies for bleeding disorders like haemophilia B. That's after a £25 million investment from the healthcare investment company Syncona, with support from UCL Business. This is cutting-edge translational research, clinical, academic, and industry working together to create companies to take forward ideas and innovations and develop them for commercial use that we can then pull back for the benefit of our patients. And it's because of that role of the companies in the NHR that I've convened this winter the Accelerated Access and Faster Cures Summit in London. The Faster Cures movement in Washington, a cross-party movement to driving reform in the way we adopt, assess innovation, particularly new drugs, very parallel with our AAR, and driving a transatlantic agenda for new pathways and new models of reimbursement. I wanted to highlight something that I don't often talk about, and we don't often hear about in this great story, which is surgery. We hear a lot about medicine, we hear a lot about preventative medicine, and we hear a lot about therapeutics and gene therapies. But all of us who know the system know that surgery is the thing that everybody ideally wants to avoid, but is actually, for so many people, the absolute key to getting treatment right. And research in surgery is equally powerful. And the NIHR NOCRI, the Office for Clinical Research Infrastructure, has been working on a very important project with the Royal College of Surgeons to develop a joint surgical technology evaluation portal. I recently went to have a demonstration at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital of the latest technology of robotic automated surgery, where the procedure is in front of you on a huge screen, allowing you to see in very large detail the organ, the operation that you're acting on, with the controls driven to an automated set of tools. So the actual surgery is done by the machine, guided by the surgeon away from the patient on precision optics. It's an extraordinary area of technology in surgery. And for that reason, I'm absolutely delighted to announce that this partnership between the NIHR and the Royal College is today being formalised. Following a successful pilot programme, the Surgical Technologies Evaluation Portal will be implemented into normal NIHR and RCS business processes. So innovators in surgical technology have a single point of access to researchers and surgeons in the NHS at the same time, and it strengthens the existing NIHR offer to the medtech sector. Companies and innovators receiving rapid advice on clinical need and the evidence requirements for new technologies. People sometimes say to me, well, is all of this actually working? Is it actually generating breakthroughs? Is it actually generating value for our economy? Let me share some of the numbers with you. Because when the NIHR and its partners set out this vision, it was really clear that industry wanted it, charities wanted it, and that the results would follow, and they have. During a year, we now have over 600,000 participants in over 5,000 clinical research studies supported by the NIHR Clinical Research Network. 600,000 people in research. Annual industry investment leveraged in by the NIHR infrastructure quadrupled from £33 million in 2009-10 to £130 million in 2014-15. And I believe we can get that number up significantly in the years ahead. That's a five-fold increase in industry-backed studies over the same period, from 514 to 3,008 a year. In 2011, our plan for growth indicated that future funding by the NIHR to NHS providers will be conditional on meeting key benchmarks, including a 70-day benchmark from receipt of a valid research application to first patient recruitment. And in October last year, 81% of trials met the benchmark, excluding those where delays were outside NHS providers' control. 2 years before, the figure was 52%. That is the real tangible progress being made across the system because of the leadership of all of you who work in this incredible organisation. These figures really matter if we're going to deliver the vision that we've sold to the Treasury and the vision that sits at the heart of the Prime Minister's commitment to the life sciences sector. The UK accelerating our development and uptake of innovation for 21st century healthcare in a way that makes the UK one of the most attractive places in the world to develop those technologies and get them tested and approved. Since we launched the Life Science Strategy, we've pulled in over £4.5 billion of inward investment to the UK from companies and countries all around the world, and we've achieved over £5 billion of exports around the world, including proton beam therapy units and a whole range of ancillary NHS-related services led by Healthcare UK and Howard Lyons. This is the UK using its research infrastructure to drive both intelligent 21st century NHS and the prosperity and the tax revenues that we'll need to pay for 21st century healthcare in an ageing economy. The challenges, of course, are great and growing. From dementia to obesity to the chronic disease burden that we all know well is putting huge pressure on the NHS. To sectors like brain cancer, where we're still a long way behind where we want to be, and that's why I've convened a working party in DH to look at what we can do to help get the data flowing, to help make the research money go further, and to use our infrastructure. The truth is, today is a day to tell, and this is a year to tell the country, be proud that we spend $1 billion a year on the NIHR, and be proud of what it's doing for this country, internationally and domestically, and what NHS patients here are benefiting from. I haven't touched on genomics. I think our genomics program is the NASA of 21st century genomic medicines. It is the global repository of ambition in this space, doing genomics within the values of a 21st century NHS, at the very highest standards of ethical, regulatory and consent protocols. The truth is, NHS England and GEL aren't just doing the sequencing of the genome and the combining of it with phenotypic data so that we begin to really shine a torch into the darkest recesses of the pharmacopoeia. They're also writing the playbook for 21st century genomic medicine. And it is a tribute to Sally and her team that on this one, the NHS is right in on day one. And it's Sue Hill and her team in those 13 genomic medicine centres working with GEL who are laying the foundations for the NHS to lead in the introduction of genomic diagnostics and medicine, not follow. On informatics, which organisation has really cracked the use of data best for research? It's the NIHR through the HICS programme. It's in those NIHR centres that data is being practically gathered, cleaned, put together to drive research. So I believe that in that space between medical research and clinical research, the intelligent investment in research medicine, the NIHR, is laying the railway tracks for this country to do something very, very special. Research as the engine of our economy and our health service. Every patient a research patient, and every hospital a research hospital. I think now we're at 95% of hospitals doing research. I'd like to get it to 100. I close with this. I genuinely think this organisation is succeeding because, and will go on to succeed because of the nobility of those values I talked about at the beginning. When you visit an NIHR facility and you see the pride of those wonderful staff with their NIHR accreditation, I'm an NIHR research nurse, I'm an NIHR informatician, I'm an NIHR research lead, I'm an NIHR professor. That badge means something, and I think there's an opportunity for us globally to get more investment in training, to get more people coming here, and to make that badge the global kite mark of excellence in clinical research. It's the values, I believe, that make it so special. And I want to close by telling you that in this Secretary of State and this Minister, although we take our place in a very long line, Alex, you have very, very strong support from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor down, because the work you do is completely essential to the resilient, healthy, prosperous and purposeful health economics and healthy society that this country desperately needs and expects to have from a government in the 21st century. Thank you.